Everyone rejected the ragged twins, until one poor waitress fed them, not knowing who their father was. She fed them for a week out of her own tips. On the 8th day, they came back in suits. Welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like and share. Now let's dive into the story. The city never slowed down. Cars streamed endlessly through crowded streets. People rushed along sidewalks, eyes fixed on glowing phone screens or the ticking clocks in their minds. No one seemed to notice the small things anymore. Not the stray cat beneath a bench, not the old man feeding pigeons in the park, and certainly not two small boys standing quietly near a bakery window. Ethan and Evan Calloway were 5 years old. To the world, they appeared to be homeless twins, thin jackets too large for their frames, knees showing through torn trousers, worn-out sneakers barely holding together. Their golden hair was deliberately mussed, their cheeks smudged with dirt. They looked like children life had forgotten. But life had not forgotten them. They were the only heirs to the Calloway empire, sons of Richard Calloway, one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Their home was a sprawling mansion overlooking the ocean. Their bedrooms were larger than most apartments. They had nannies, tutors, and more toys than they could ever play with. Yet none of it filled the emptiness left behind by their mother. 2 years earlier, Isabella Calloway had passed away after a sudden illness. She had been warmth personified, laughter in the hallways, gentle hands wiping tears, bedtime stories spoken in soft candlelight. After she was gone, the mansion felt cold despite its golden chandeliers. Their father had tried. But grief had changed him. He buried himself in board meetings, business flights, and endless negotiations. He loved his sons fiercely, that much was certain, but he didn't know how to mend what was broken inside them. And the boys, though young, felt the distance. One evening, after overhearing two housekeepers whisper about how people only respect the Calloways because of money, Ethan had asked a question that lingered in both brothers' hearts. If we didn't have money, would anyone still be nice to us? That question followed them for weeks. Until one day, in surprising seriousness for children so young, they made a decision. They wanted to find someone kind. Not someone impressed by wealth. Not someone drawn to power. Someone who would care, even if they had nothing. Richard had dismissed the idea at first. The thought of his sons walking the streets unsettled him. But when he saw on a cool Monday morning, dressed in carefully chosen rags prepared by a trusted security aide, the twins stepped out of a discreet vehicle several blocks from downtown. Hidden cameras and bodyguards blended into the crowd. Richard watched from a tinted SUV parked across the street, his jaw tight with unease. The boys clutched each other's hands. "Remember," Evan whispered, though he was only 5, "we just asked politely." Ethan nodded bravely. Their first attempt was outside a high-end cafe. A woman in designer heels and sunglasses stood checking her reflection in the window. "Excuse me," Ethan said softly. "We're hungry. Can we have something to eat?" She glanced down briefly, then frowned as if something unpleasant had brushed against her shoe. "Where are your parents?" she snapped. "Go find a shelter. Don't bother people." She walked away before they could respond. The sting of rejection settled into their small chests. They tried again outside a grocery store. This time, a man muttered, "Scammers," under his breath and pulled his child closer as if the twins carried something contagious. By mid-afternoon, they had approached 7 people. 2 ignored them completely. 3 scolded them. 1 accused them of lying. 1 threatened to call the police. Each reaction carved confusion into their innocent minds. Why were people angry? They had said please. They had said thank you. From across the street, Richard felt his heart twist painfully. Every instinct told him to end the experiment immediately, to rush forward and shield them from the world's harshness. But he forced himself to remain still. They needed truth. As evening approached, the city lights flickered on. The twins sat quietly on a park bench, their small shoulders slumped. "Maybe Mama was just special," Evan whispered. Ethan swallowed hard. "Maybe kind people don't live here." Richard stepped out of the car then, unable to bear their defeat. He knelt in front of them, brushing dirt gently from Ethan's cheek. "There are kind people," he said firmly. "Sometimes, they are just harder to find." The boys looked at him with fragile hope. "Can we try again tomorrow?" Ethan asked. Richard hesitated. He thought of board meetings, contracts, the empire waiting for his decisions. Then he thought of his wife, how she used to stop the car to help strangers, how she believed goodness still existed in the world. He nodded slowly. "Yes, we'll try again." As they drove back toward the mansion that night, the twins fell asleep in the back seat, still dressed in their ragged clothes. Richard glanced at them through the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about stock prices. He was thinking about humanity. He didn't know it yet, but somewhere in that very city, a tired young waitress with a gentle smile was about to change all their lives. And the real test was only beginning. Maple's diner sat quietly on the corner of 8th and Willow Street, squeezed between a pawn shop and a laundromat with a flickering sign. It wasn't the kind of place people photographed for social media. The paint on the door had begun to peel, and the bell above it rang a little too loudly whenever someone entered. But inside, it was warm. The scent of coffee, grilled onions, and fresh bread wrapped around anyone who stepped through the door. The booths were worn but clean, their red cushions slightly cracked from years of use. A chalkboard menu hung crookedly behind the counter, featuring daily specials written in colorful chalk. And moving swiftly between tables, balancing plates with practiced grace, was Clara Bennett. At 26, Clara had already lived a life that felt much longer. After losing both parents in her early 20s, she had given up her college dreams to raise her younger sister, Lily. Every tip she earned went toward rent, groceries, and school supplies. Every late shift meant another morning waking up exhausted. Yet somehow, "I don't know," she would shrug. "Everyone's carrying something heavy. The least I can do is not add to it." That evening, the diner was nearly empty. The dinner rush had passed, and Clara was wiping down the last booth near the window. Outside, the sky had turned dusky purple, streetlights humming awake one by one. The bell above the door rang. Clara glanced up. Two small boys stood just inside the entrance. They looked no older than 5. Their clothes were oversized and worn thin. One boy's sleeve hung past his fingers, and the other's shoe sole flapped slightly as he shifted his weight. Their hair was messy, their faces faintly smudged. But it was their eyes that caught her. They weren't wild or mischievous. They were careful, hesitant, hopeful. The shorter one stepped forward first. "Miss?" His voice was small but steady. "Can we have something to eat? We're very hungry." Clara's hand tightened slightly around her cleaning rag. She had seen children like this before. Some came in asking for water. Some were sent away by the manager immediately. The diner wasn't a charity, and her boss, Mr. Jenkins, ran it on razor-thin margins. But these boys weren't demanding. They were asking politely, and they looked like they were trying very hard not to cry. Clara crouched down so she was at eye level with them. "What are your names?" she asked gently. The boy who had spoken glanced at his brother before answering. "I'm Ethan. This is Evan." "Well," she said softly. "Ethan and Evan, have you eaten anything today?" They shook their heads. Clara stood slowly, her heart already making the decision her wallet couldn't afford. "Come sit," she said, guiding them toward a booth near the back. "I'll see what I can do." From across the street, inside a black SUV parked beneath a dim street lamp, Richard Calloway watched through tinted windows. He leaned forward slightly. This was new. Inside the diner, Clara slipped into the kitchen. "2 grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup," she told the cook quietly. Mr. Jenkins frowned. "For who?" She hesitated. "I'll pay for it." He studied her for a moment before shrugging. "Comes out of your tips." She nodded without argument. Minutes later, Clara returned with 2 steaming plates. She set them down carefully in front of the twins, along with glasses of milk. Their eyes widened as though she had placed treasure before them. "Eat slowly," she said gently. "It's hot." They didn't devour the food the way some hungry children might. Instead, they ate carefully, almost politely, as if afraid the meal might disappear if they moved too fast. Clara sat across from them during her break. "So," she asked lightly, "where do you boys stay?" Ethan glanced at Evan again, their silent communication remarkable for children so young. "We move around," Evan said. It wasn't exactly a lie. Clara felt a pang in her chest but didn't press further. She could sense their boundaries, their pride. Instead, she asked about their favorite colors, their favorite animals, whether they liked school. Gradually, small smiles replaced guarded expressions. Evan giggled when Clara made a silly face trying to pronounce a dinosaur name. Ethan carefully wiped his brother's chin with a napkin, a protective instinct that didn't go unnoticed. When they finished, Clara packed 2 extra rolls in a paper bag. "For later," she said quietly. Ethan's eyes shimmered. "Why are you being nice to us?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She paused. Then she answered honestly. "Because you're 2 little boys who said you were hungry. That's reason enough." Outside, Richard exhaled slowly. No hesitation. No suspicion. No performance. Just kindness. When the twins slid out of the booth, Evan did something unexpected. He stepped forward and hugged Clara around the waist. For a split second, she froze in surprise. Then she wrapped her arms around him. It had been a long time since someone hugged her like that, without expectation, without conditions. "Thank you, Miss Clara," Ethan said softly. She blinked. "I don't remember telling you my name." Ethan's face turned pink. "Your name tag," he said quickly. She smiled. "Well, you're welcome." As they left the diner and disappeared down the sidewalk, Clara stood at the window longer than she meant to. Something about them tugged at her heart. They were too polite, too composed, too careful. But she brushed the thought aside. The world had a way of making children grow up too fast. Across the street, Richard remained seated long after the boys returned to the SUV. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Evan hugged the paper bag of extra rolls to his chest. "She didn't look mad," Ethan said. "She didn't look scared," Evan added. Richard nodded slowly. No, she hadn't looked at them like a problem. She had looked at them like they mattered. And for the first time since the experiment began, Richard felt something shift inside him. A small crack in the wall grief had built around his heart. The test wasn't over. But for the first time, there was hope. The twins returned the next afternoon. Clara noticed them before the bell above the door even finished ringing. She didn't know why she had glanced up at that exact moment. Perhaps part of her had been hoping they would come back. They stood in the doorway again, hesitant but smiling this time. "You came back," she said, unable to hide the warmth in her voice. Ethan nodded. "If that's okay." Clara pretended to consider it seriously, tapping her chin. That day she brought them chicken soup and warm bread. She paid again from her tips, ignoring the small knot of anxiety forming in her stomach as she mentally calculated rent due at the end of the week. From across the street, Richard watched. He had expected kindness once, maybe twice. But when the twins returned the 3rd day, and the 4th, and the 5th, something deeper began to reveal itself. Clara never asked for recognition. Never hinted that she was sacrificing anything. Never sighed or complained when she pulled a few bills from her apron pocket to cover their meals. Instead, she asked about their day. She told them silly stories about customers who couldn't decide between pancakes and waffles. She quizzed them on spelling simple words. She taught them how to fold napkins into little triangles while she worked. On the 4th day, she noticed Evan shivering slightly. The autumn air had grown colder. Without hesitation, Clara disappeared into the back room and returned with a soft gray sweater from her locker, the one she kept for late-night walks home. "It's a little big," she said gently, slipping it over his shoulders, "but that just means you'll grow into it." Evan clutched the sleeves, eyes wide. No one had given him something that belonged to them before. In the SUV, Richard's hand tightened on the steering wheel. That sweater wasn't spare change. It wasn't leftovers. It was hers. Inside the diner, Clara began setting aside small portions before the dinner rush, mashed potatoes in a container, a slice of pie wrapped carefully in foil. She made it seem casual, as though she simply had too much food. But every night after they left, she stood by the window watching until they disappeared from sight. She worried. Where did they sleep? Who protected them? Did they have blankets? On the 6th day, she finally asked gently, "Do you boys have somewhere safe at night?" Ethan hesitated. Richard had instructed them never to reveal too much. "We're okay," Ethan said carefully. "We look out for each other." Clara's chest ached at the seriousness in his voice. 5-year-olds weren't supposed to talk like that. "You shouldn't have to," she murmured. That evening, after closing, Clara sat alone in the dim diner counting her tips. It had been a slow week. After subtracting what she had spent feeding the twins, she stared at the small pile of bills left in her hand. Rent was due in 3 days. Her phone buzzed, a message from her younger sister, Lily. "Don't forget about my school trip payment. It's due Friday." Clara closed her eyes briefly. "God," she whispered softly, "help me stretch what little I have." She could stop feeding the boys. She should stop. Logic told her she wasn't responsible for every hungry child in the city. But every time she pictured their careful manners, the way they said thank you as if it truly mattered, she couldn't turn them away. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening inside the black SUV parked faithfully across the street each day. Richard Calloway was remembering. He remembered Isabella insisting on stopping to buy groceries for a struggling neighbor. He remembered her packing extra snacks in case another child might need one. He remembered the way she would say, "Kindness is never wasted, Richard." For the first time in years, he saw a reflection of his late wife, not in appearance, but in spirit. Clara wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't know she was being watched. Her compassion wasn't strategic. It was instinct. On the 7th day, something shifted. The diner was busier than usual, and Clara was overwhelmed. Orders were mixed up. A customer complained loudly about cold coffee. Mr. Jenkins snapped at her for moving too slowly. In the chaos, the twins sat quietly in their usual booth, watching her. When she finally reached them, strands of hair had fallen loose from her ponytail, and exhaustion shadowed her eyes. "Sorry, my favorite customers," she said softly. "Today's a little crazy." Evans studied her carefully. "Are you sad?" he asked. The question startled her. Adults rarely asked each other that so directly. She forced a small smile. "Just tired." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a crumpled drawing made on a napkin. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a crooked sun. "That's you," he said, pointing to the middle figure. "You're smiling." Clara stared at the drawing. Her throat tightened unexpectedly. No one had drawn her picture in years. She crouched beside them, brushing her fingers gently over their hair. "You boys are something special," she whispered. Outside, Richard watched Clara wipe a tear quickly from her cheek before standing again to serve another table. He had seen enough. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't charity motivated by ego. This was heart. That night, after the twins were buckled safely into the SUV, Richard turned to them. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we end the test." Evan clutched Clara's sweater. "Will we still see her?" Richard looked back at the glowing diner sign in the distance. "Yes," he said slowly, "if she'll have us." As the SUV drove away, the diner lights flickered off one by one. Inside her small apartment across town, Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. She didn't know why she felt restless. She didn't know that the boys she worried about slept in silk sheets. She didn't know that her life was about to collide with a world far beyond her imagination. All she knew was this. Tomorrow, she hoped they would come back. And sometimes, hope is the beginning of everything. The morning of the 8th day began badly. Clara woke before her alarm, her mind already racing. The landlord had slipped a reminder notice under her apartment door the night before. Rent was due. Her tips from the week were short. Lily's school payment still hadn't been made. For a long moment, she lay staring at the ceiling, calculating numbers that refused to stretch far enough. "I'll figure it out," she whispered to herself. She always did. By the time she reached Maple's diner, gray clouds hung low over the city, threatening rain. Inside, the coffee machine sputtered angrily, and Mr. Jenkins announced that one of the cooks had called in sick. "Today's not the day for mistakes, Clara," she told herself not to expect them. Children living on the streets didn't move on schedules. Still, every time the bell above the diner door rang, her heart lifted slightly, then settled again when it wasn't them. Outside, across the street, a sleek black SUV pulled into a parking space. But today was different. Today, Richard Calloway did not sit alone inside the vehicle watching through tinted glass. Today, he stepped out. The twins climbed out after him. They no longer wore oversized rags or worn sneakers. Ethan wore a tailored navy suit, perfectly fitted to his small frame. Evan wore a charcoal gray one. Their shoes shined. Their golden hair was neatly combed. Their faces were clean, glowing with quiet anticipation. They looked like what they were, heirs to an empire. Pedestrians slowed as they passed. A few recognized Richard instantly. Whispers trailed behind them like wind. "Isn't that?" "It is. That's Calloway." "What's he doing here?" Richard took his son's hands. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. Ethan nodded. "She's kind even when she's tired." Evan squeezed his father's hand. She didn't stop smiling. Richard swallowed. "Then let's go." Inside the diner, Clara was refilling a coffee cup when the bell above the door rang again. She didn't look up immediately. "Good morning. Welcome to Maple's." Her voice faltered. The coffee pot nearly slipped from her fingers. Standing in the doorway were two small, impeccably dressed boys. For half a second, her mind refused to connect the image with memory. Then Ethan smiled, and the world tilted. "Miss Clara." The way he said her name, gentle, familiar, made her heart slam against her ribs. Evan stepped forward, grinning. "We came back." She stared at them. Their clothes, their polished shoes, their clean, carefully styled hair. Her eyes slowly lifted. And then she saw him. Richard Calloway stood behind them, tall and composed in a tailored black coat. His presence seemed to shift the very air in the diner. Conversations quieted. Even Mr. Jenkins straightened instinctively behind the counter. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She recognized him instantly. Everyone did. His face appeared on business magazines, financial news, charity galas. Billionaire. Widower. Untouchable. Her first thought was panic. Had she done something wrong? Were the boys taken from him? Had she unknowingly interfered in something serious? She quickly set the coffee pot down. I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "If I overstepped in any way, I didn't know." Before she could finish, Ethan and Evan ran toward her. They wrapped their arms around her waist just like they had days before. Only this time, the entire diner was watching. "You fed us," Evan said, as if that explained everything. Clara looked down at them, utterly confused. Richard stepped forward slowly. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Please don't apologize." She straightened instinctively, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. You're their father." "Yes." The single word carried weight. Understanding crashed into her all at once. The careful answers. The way they spoke. Their unusual composure. "They are not homeless," she whispered. "No," Richard replied gently. "They are not." The diner had fallen completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff peeked out. Clara's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Oh my goodness," she breathed. "I am so sorry if I didn't mean to assume." "You assumed they were hungry," Richard said quietly. "And you fed them." His tone stopped her. There was no accusation in it. Only gratitude. He gestured toward a booth. "May we sit?" Numbly, she nodded. They moved to the twins' usual table, the booth where they had shared soup and sandwiches all week. The contrast between past and present was almost surreal. Richard remained standing for a moment. "I owe you an explanation," he said. The twins looked at him expectantly. Clara clasped her hands together, trying to steady herself. Richard drew a slow breath. "My sons lost their mother 2 years ago. The softness in his voice changed the air between them. They've struggled. I've struggled. He paused. We have met many people since then. Some kind. Some interested in other things. Clara listened, her earlier fear dissolving into something else, empathy. They wanted to know, Richard continued, glancing at the boys, if someone would care for them without knowing who they were. Her eyes widened slightly. They chose to test the world. Silence stretched between them. You knew, she asked faintly. I was nearby, he admitted. Every day. The realization made her stomach flip. You were watching? Yes. There was no shame in his answer. I needed to see for myself. Clara replayed every moment in her mind. The sweater, the extra bread rolls, the napkin drawing. A rush of vulnerability washed over her. You don't have to worry, she said quickly. I never expected anything from them. They looked like they needed help. Ethan reached for her hand. You didn't look at us like we were dirty, he said softly. The simplicity of the statement pierced her heart. Richard's voice lowered. You paid for their meals yourself, even when business was slow. Her eyes flickered. That's not something most people would do. She swallowed. It's just food. No, he said gently. It isn't. For a moment, the world outside the booth seemed to disappear. No whispers. No staring customers. Just 4 people sitting at a small diner table. Clara searched his face, expecting pride or calculation. She found neither. Instead, she saw a man who looked tired. Lonely. Grateful. The twins slid closer to her. We told Daddy you were special, Evan announced proudly. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Richard's lips curved into the faintest smile. And I've learned to trust their judgment. The weight of his words settled between them. Clara had walked into work that morning worried about rent. Now a billionaire sat across from her, thanking her for kindness she hadn't thought twice about. The world felt unsteady. But as Ethan squeezed her hand again, something grounded her. Whatever this moment meant, whatever would come next, one thing was certain. The test was over, and none of their lives would ever be the same. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though curious glances still floated toward the corner booth. Richard noticed them. Would you prefer somewhere more private? He asked Clara gently. She shook her head. No, this is fine. This booth, slightly cracked red leather, a faint smell of coffee in the wood, was where the truth had begun. It felt wrong to move the conversation elsewhere. The twins sat unusually quietly, sensing the importance of the moment. Richard folded his hands on the table. My wife's name was Isabella, he began. The way he said her name, not rushed, not dramatic, but careful, made Clara understand that he didn't speak it lightly. She believed that character is revealed when there is nothing to gain. His gaze drifted briefly to his sons. After she passed, I failed in many ways. I buried myself in work. I convinced myself I was providing for them by expanding the company, securing their future. His jaw tightened slightly. But children don't measure love in stock options. Clara felt the weight of those words. They needed presence, he continued. Warmth. Stability. And he paused. I was still grieving. Ethan reached up and placed his small hand over his father's wrist. Richard covered it gently. We met people, he said. Nannies, tutors, acquaintances. Some were kind. Some were interested in proximity to wealth. I became cautious. Suspicious. His eyes met Clara's. And so did they. Clara understood more than he realized. Losing parents young had forced her to grow up quickly. She recognized that careful watchfulness in the twins from the very first day. It was their idea, Richard admitted quietly. The test. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. They asked me, if we were poor, would someone still care about us? The innocence of the question tightened her chest. I didn't know how to answer them, he continued. So I agreed to let them find out. He didn't mention how much it had terrified him. How every rejection had felt like a personal failure. How he had nearly ended it after the first harsh encounter. But then they walked into this diner. Silence lingered softly between them. You didn't hesitate, he said. Clara shook her head slightly. They were hungry. You didn't question their story. They are children. You didn't look around to see who was watching. She gave a faint, almost embarrassed smile. No one ever watches here. Richard did. And that changed everything. You gave them your sweater, he said gently. Her cheeks warmed. It was cold. You paid for their food every day. It wasn't much. It was everything. His voice was no longer composed and polished like a CEO addressing a boardroom. It was raw. Honest. I've seen million-dollar donations made for publicity, he said quietly. I've seen generosity with contracts attached. He held her gaze. What you did had no audience. The truth of it settled heavily. Clara shifted slightly, suddenly aware of the simplicity of her uniform, the fraying thread on her apron pocket. I wasn't trying to prove anything, she said softly. I just remember what it felt like. What felt like? Being scared and pretending you're not. The words surprised even her. She hadn't meant to say that. But once they were out, she didn't take them back. I lost my parents young, she continued more quietly. There were days my sister and I didn't know how we'd manage. People helped us. Sometimes strangers. She glanced at the twins. You don't forget that. Richard studied her differently now, not as the subject of a test, but as a woman shaped by hardship who had chosen softness instead of bitterness. That's rare, he said. She gave a small shrug. It shouldn't be. The twins slid closer to her again, as if instinctively drawn to her steadiness. Evan rested his head lightly against her arm. Richard noticed. They've grown attached to you, he said. Clara smiled faintly. I've grown attached to them too. The admission lingered in the air. Richard leaned back slightly, as though making room for something important. I didn't come here to embarrass you, he said, or to reward you like some kind of charity case. Her spine straightened slightly at that. I came to thank you. His voice softened further. And to ask if you would allow us to know you outside of this experiment. Her heart skipped. Know me. For dinner. Properly. Without disguises. A faint hint of nervousness crept into his tone, subtle, but real. The boys would like that. Ethan nodded enthusiastically. And so would I, Richard added, more quietly. Clara's pulse fluttered unexpectedly. This wasn't a business proposition. There was no contract on the table. No transaction. Just an invitation. She hesitated, not because she doubted his sincerity, but because their worlds were galaxies apart. You realize, she said gently, I'm just a waitress. Richard's expression changed, not amused, not dismissive, but firm. You say that as if it's small. He leaned forward slightly. I am a businessman because of opportunity. You are who you are because of character. Those are not the same. Her breath caught. No one had ever framed it that way before. Across the diner, Mr. Jenkins pretended not to stare. Clara looked down at the twins. Would it still be Maple's diner food? Ethan asked hopefully. She laughed softly, the tension breaking. Maybe I'll let someone else cook for once. Richard smiled, a real one this time. It transformed his face, softening the grief etched there. Then it settled. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a simple card on the table. No flashy gold embossing. Just his name and number. No pressure, he said. Call if you're comfortable. There was no arrogance in the gesture. Only patience. As he stood, the twins hugged her again, longer this time. We meant it, Evan whispered. You're special. Clara blinked back unexpected tears. When they finally stepped outside, the sky had begun to drizzle lightly. Richard held his coat over the boys as they walked to the SUV. Before getting in, he glanced back at the diner window. Clara was still standing there, watching, not with awe, not with ambition, but with cautious hope. And for the first time in years, Richard felt something unfamiliar but welcome begin to take root inside his guarded heart. Not gratitude, not obligation, something gentler, possibility. Clara didn't call immediately. The card sat on her small kitchen table for 2 days. She passed it each morning while packing Lily's lunch. Each night she glanced at it while calculating bills. The simple white rectangle felt heavier than paper should. Richard Calloway. A world she had only seen in magazines. But when she closed her eyes, she didn't picture headlines or wealth. She pictured Ethan's careful smile, Evan wrapped in her sweater, and a widowed father who had looked at her not with superiority, but sincerity. On the third evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Clara picked up her phone. Before she could lose her courage, she dialed. Richard answered on the second ring. "Hello." His voice was calm, but there was unmistakable hope beneath it. "It's Clara." The exhale on the other end was soft, relieved. "I'm glad you called." Dinner was not at a 5-star rooftop restaurant as Clara had feared. Instead, Richard chose a quiet seaside place, elegant but not overwhelming. The twins ran to her the moment she arrived, dressed neatly but not extravagantly this time. "You came." Evan beamed. "You doubted me," she teased gently. Throughout dinner, Clara noticed something surprising. Richard listened. Truly listened. When she spoke about Lily's school ambitions, he asked thoughtful questions. When she described long shifts at the diner, he didn't pity her, he respected her endurance. And when the twins spoke, he gave them his full attention. The wealth surrounding him suddenly seemed secondary. This was not a man defined only by money. This was a father trying to rebuild something broken. Weeks passed. Richard began visiting Maple's diner, not in expensive suits, but in rolled-up sleeves. At first, customers stared. Eventually, they grew used to it. He never tried to rescue Clara from her life. Instead, he stepped into it. He fixed a leaking pipe in the diner kitchen one afternoon when Mr. Jenkins couldn't afford repairs. He quietly ensured Lily received an anonymous scholarship for her school trip, though Clara later discovered the truth and firmly insisted on repaying it. That was their first disagreement. "I don't want charity," she said gently but firmly. Richard nodded. "And I don't want to insult your strength." They learned each other that day. He learned she valued dignity over comfort. She learned he valued partnership over control. The twins, meanwhile, flourished. They spent afternoons at Clara's apartment baking cookies. They insisted she attend their school recital. Evan refused to sleep without the grey sweater nearby, even after owning dozens of warmer ones. One evening, as Clara tucked them into bed at the Calloway estate, a place that no longer intimidated her the way it once had, Ethan looked up at her seriously. "You don't look scared here anymore," he observed. She smiled softly. "I'm not." And she realized it was true. The mansion no longer felt cold. It felt lived in. Despite the growing closeness, one shadow remained, Isabella's memory. Clara never tried to replace her. Instead, she asked about her. Richard showed her photographs one quiet evening, Isabella laughing on a beach, reading to the twins as babies, flour dust on her cheek from baking. "She had a way of making people feel safe," he said softly. Clara studied the photo. She must have been extraordinary. She was. There was no jealousy in her heart, only understanding. "You don't have to let go of her," Clara said gently. "Love doesn't work like that." Richard looked at her then, really looked at her, and something inside him settled. Clara wasn't trying to erase the past. She was helping him carry it. It happened months later. Not at a gala. Not in front of cameras. But back at Maple's diner. Richard had quietly arranged for renovations. New booths, fresh paint, better kitchen equipment, all under the condition that Clara remain co-owner alongside Mr. Jenkins, who happily accepted early retirement. The diner closed for one evening for the small reopening. When Clara walked inside, she froze. The space was transformed. Warm lighting, polished floors, the same red booths restored instead of replaced. And in the center of the room stood Ethan and Evan, holding a small velvet box together. Richard stood behind them. "We learned something important this year," he began. Clara's heart pounded. "We learned that kindness doesn't need wealth. But wealth without kindness is empty." The twins stepped forward. "Miss Clara," Evan said nervously, "will you stay with us forever?" Tears blurred her vision. Richard moved closer. "I cannot promise a life without difficulty," he said quietly. "But I can promise partnership, respect, and love that chooses you every day." He knelt, not as a billionaire making a grand gesture, but as a man asking humbly, "Clara Bennett, will you marry me?" The diner was silent except for the twins' barely contained excitement. She looked at them first, then at him. This wasn't about money. It wasn't about rescue. It wasn't about a fairy tale. It was about a week of quiet kindness that had changed 4 lives. "Yes," she whispered. The twins cheered before Richard even slipped the ring onto her finger. The wedding was intimate. No media. No spectacle. Just family, close friends, and 2 boys who proudly walked Clara down the aisle together. When she moved into the Calloway estate, she brought little with her: clothes, framed photos of her parents, Lily's laughter echoing through the halls. But somehow, the mansion felt fuller than it ever had. Warmer, louder, alive. Months later, as Clara stood in the kitchen helping with homework while Richard attempted, and failed, to cook dinner, she realized something profound. The twins had gone searching for kindness. They had found a mother. Richard had gone searching for someone genuine. He had found a partner. And she, a tired waitress with a weary smile, had found something she never dared to dream of. Not wealth, but belonging. And in the end, it wasn't the 8th day that changed everything. It was the first small act of kindness, offered with no expectation at all. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Do well to like and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.